Hi, it's Carolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this bumblebee first birthday cake. And like always, I'm starting with my cakes already baked, filled, iced, and they are in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. I have tons of videos showing you how I do that process, and those will be linked below. And also, any of the tools that I use and all of the videos that I reference will be linked below as well. And I will also let you know how much I charged for this cake. So let's get started. All right, guys, I have Gumtex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's all basically the same thing. This is mixed into all of my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. I get the best results from marshmallow fondant. Store-bought fondant is way too soft. It doesn't set as hard as marshmallow fondant when you add the Tylose. So I just recommend that you use marshmallow fondant. Sprinkle a little bit of this on there, knead it in there, roll it out, let it sit. It's going to set up hard and be so much easier to cut and work with. I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And I printed these out the size I wanted them to be. So I measured the top tier of my cake and I made sure that I printed them out the correct size. I rolled that yellow fondant out really thin, and I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method to create this topper. Now I'm taking my Dresden tool and gently tracing this name onto the fondant, making sure I get all of the center detail as well. You don't want to press too hard because you don't want to poke a hole into the fondant. You just want to make sure that you can transfer all of these letters on there. And you can see that transferred onto the fondant. Now I want to take my X-Acto knife and cut this out. So I always start by cutting out the center pieces first and then taking my tools and smoothing those cuts out before I cut the rest of the name out. It is just so much easier if you cut these smaller inner details first. That way you can smooth them out without distorting the name. So it's not only the center of the letters, but the center of all of these little loops. So I had to do all of the center pieces and then I cut out the rest of this. So you want to have that Tylose powder mixed into your fondant because the fondant is going to set a little harder and it's not going to drag when you do this. If your fondant is too soft, you're not going to be able to do this. It's going to be a nightmare. The fondant's going to drag. So you have to make sure you get your fondant to the correct consistency. And I have tons of videos showing you how I do that. Now I'm gently peeling this fondant away to make sure that it's not stuck to the letters and I'm not going to rip that. And then I like to take my fingers and my tools to smooth my cuts. So anytime you cut anything out of fondant, the edges are going to be a little jagged and imperfect. So what I like to do is use my tools and my fingers and I'm smoothing everything to make it look nice and pretty. It takes a lot of time to do this, but it makes it look so much better. So I'm realigning this back on top of the picture and I'm going to set that aside while I work on the rest of the topper. So luckily that little hexagon cutter that I have was the exact size that I needed. So I rolled out yellow fondant in a couple different shades. I have like lighter yellow, a medium yellow, and darker yellow. And I'm just cutting all of these pieces out and smoothing my cuts. And now I have this thin white fondant. Again, it does have that Tylose powder in there. And I do have that picture close for reference. And I'm just putting these on there similar to the picture. So I'm leaving a little white space in between all of these pieces. And I'm starting with the light yellow. And then it's kind of like ombre going down to the bottom. And it gets darker as it gets to the base. And then once I have that all on there, I want to cut an even white border. So I am just taking my X-Acto knife and I'm getting real close and cutting a white border around this entire thing. And then do I even need to say it? Once I cut it out, I'm going to take my fingers and smooth all of those edges so it looks nice and pretty. Now I have this black fondant rolled out about a 1/2 inch thick so I can get a skewer underneath it. I got some water behind that and I'm sticking that down. And since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I need to make a guideline first. So I'm just sticking the tip of my X-Acto knife into that black fondant and cutting an even black border around this entire thing. And then once I have that done, I'm going to stick the tip of my knife all the way down to the cutting board and cut this out. So when you do that guideline first, it helps to prevent you from messing up the top edge of the fondant when you cut the rest of it away. It does seem a little extra, but believe me, it just works so much better when I have that guideline so I don't distort the top edge of the fondant. And then when that is done, I'm going to flip it over and use my fingers or my tools and smooth it. Do you see how jagged it is? If you look, you can see pieces of fondant sticking out. So I'm just smoothing them back down and then I flip it right side up and again use my fingers and my tools to smooth out my cuts. And then I want to put skewers in here. So I wet these skewers and I'm twisting them in there. I'm not jabbing them in. And I'm holding this and flipping it over and making sure that this is not sticking out the front or the back. I want to make sure that you can't see the skewer, but I'm screwing it in as much as I can. And then I'm going to set that on a cutting board and just set that aside at room temperature to dry. Now I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method to create the rest of this. So I have this number 1. And again, I'm tracing this onto the black fondant and I'm going to cut it out and smooth my cuts. And then I'm going to get a little bit of water behind it and put it on a piece of thin yellow fondant and get really close and cut an even yellow border around the entire thing. And again, once that's all cut out, smoothing my cuts to make it look nice and pretty. Now I want to get a border behind the name, so I find it easier to flip the paper upside down and the name upside down, and I'm getting a little bit of water behind each of these letters and then realigning it on top of the picture so it is in the correct position. And then I want to take a piece of black fondant and put the good side facing down, and I'm rolling this down onto that yellow fondant and press down, and voila, it's transferred on there. It's just so much easier to do it that way when you have a really long name, because if you try to lift it up and put it down on the black fondant, it's going to get distorted. So I am cutting an even black border around here, and again, taking my fingers and my tools just to smooth it out once I cut it out. And then I'm going to set that aside on that cutting board at room temperature so it can dry flat. Now I have these daisy cutters and I'm making the big sunflower, and what you have to do is put the fondant upside down on this cutter and press it down, and then I like to use a rolling pin to press it down even more to make sure I get a clean cut. If you try to press it down on the countertop to cut it out, it may not work, so it's just a little easier to do it this way. And I want 2 of the bigger flowers and 1 of the smaller one. Now I did not come up with the technique on how to make this. I will link the video down below that goes into detail on how to make these flowers. It's not my own tutorial. So now I have this little cutter here. I rolled that brown fondant into a little disc and pressed it on there. It is kind of thick, you see that? So I just wanted the impression in there. And now I have these circle cutters and I'm cutting a circle out so I can separate all of these petals. So again, I have 2 big, oh, and I did 2 small. So I just wanted to make sure I had enough petals. Now I have this, I believe it's a 20 gauge wire. I'll find what gauge wire I use and link it below. But I'm cutting them in 1-inch strips. And then I'm taking one of those wires and I'm dipping one end into the piping gel and putting this into the flat end, not the pointy end of the petal. And I squeeze it where it comes into contact with the wire. And then I'm taking my ball tool on a flower foam and just thinning the edges of this petal. And then what I like to do is pinch the very end so it comes to a point, and I'm curving the sides up a little bit just to give it a little bit of motion. And then so these dry with the shape to them, I crumpled up some aluminum foil. Then I'm going to rest these petals on top of here so they can dry with a little curve to them. And then I'm going to repeat the process, inserting the wire into the bottom, thinning out the edges, and then pinching the very tip and then curving the edges up to give it a little bit of motion. It's kind of bent backwards a little bit, and then resting it on that aluminum foil. So I did that for all of these petals. So I have the large ones set on one piece of foil and the smaller ones are set on another piece of foil. I'm going to set those aside to dry. Now I want to make the smaller sunflowers. These are easier ones to make. So again, I'm putting that yellow fondant upside down on there and using my rolling pin to cut that out. And then I'm going to press it down on the countertop just to transfer that little pattern that's in the cutter and set those aside. So I'm doing 2 of each size, and then I'm making the centers of the flowers as well. And I will put this little mold, put a link for the mold in the description, but I'm just getting a little bit of brown fondant in these cavities and just pressing down there to transfer the pattern. And there's the center to my little sunflowers. And now I want to color these in. So I have some brown and some like orange petal dust. I will find similar ones and link them below. I like to tap it into the lid first to remove any excess. And then I'm just shading these in. I think I did some chocolate brown in the center and then a darker brown around the edges, whatever you can do just to give it a little dimension. And then for the orange, I want the center of these sunflowers to be more orange than the tips. So it's less orange as it gets to the outer edges. So now I am taking one flower, flipping it upside down, getting some water on it, and then placing it down on another flower of the same size. And I'm taking my paintbrush and making sure the petals on top are staggered in between the petals on the bottom, and then I'm putting the center of the flowers on. So again, get some water behind it, make sure the top petals are staggered in front of the bottom so they're not just lined up perfectly, and then put the center pieces on here. And this is a simpler way to make these sunflowers. So let's set those aside. Now I have this mold. I will link this below. I got it on Amazon. I'm getting a little bit of shortening in the mold so it doesn't stick. And then I'm getting a little bit of white fondant and I'm pressing that into the wings. So I want the wings to be white. And once I have that pressed in there, I'm going to get a little bit of water on the back of that white fondant and then press some yellow fondant down on top. This way the yellow fondant will stick to the white fondant and the wings will be a different color. It just looks so much better if you do it this way. Flip it over, pull it out, and voila. So we're going to set those aside, and I'm doing the same thing for all of these bees. These are all different. So again, just getting a white piece of fondant where the wings go and then getting some water on the white and pressing some yellow fondant on top so the wings are a different color. And then I'll show you how I do it on this one too. So I got some white in there and I'm using the end of my paintbrush just to press that white into the correct position. Got some water behind it, peel it back, and now I have white wings. So I did that many times. It probably took about a half hour to an hour to do it. And now I want to cut the excess fondant away. So do you see how I'm holding my knife at an angle? I'm cutting into the bee. I don't just have it straight up and down. This way you won't be able to really see the fondant back behind it, if that makes any sense. So I'm just doing it for all of these bees, cutting the excess fondant away and then smoothing the jagged edges with my fingers, and let's set those aside. Now I have some black edible ink and I'm dipping the tip of my edible marker into the black ink. This just helps to prolong the life of these black edible markers. And for all of these bees, I'm coloring in the eyes and I'm also coloring in the lines on the body. This is a tedious process. It took forever. So again, just coloring in the eyes and just doing a couple black lines across the body. And those look good. Let's set those aside. Now let's stack the cake. So I got that out of the refrigerator. I'm using my ruler to measure the height of the straws and just marking with a marker just past the edge of the ruler. And then I'm going to take my scissors and cut that marker off, throw that piece away. And I'm going to put all of those straws in the bottom tier, get a little bit of icing down. And my hands are always clean whenever I handle these cakes. I'm putting that middle tier on and repeating the process. Now I do have a video where I go into detail on how I stack my cakes, and I will link that in the description, but I'm doing the same thing. Measure how tall the straws should be, cut the straws, sink them into the tier, get a little bit of icing down, and put the next tier on. And then I want to make sure that it's level. You always have to make sure the cake is level. It's very important. And then I want to dowel the cake. So I'm hammering the dowel down through the cake into the cake drum and just patching that extra hole with some buttercream. Now I rolled that black fondant out really long and I'm cutting a thin ribbon and two thicker ribbons. That ribbon cutter will be linked in the description. And then after I cut them out, I like to take my rulers and just straighten them out so they stay straight before I put them on the cake. Now I have some piping gel and I'm just getting piping gel around the perimeter, the bottom perimeter of all three tiers. And then I'm going to start in the very back and wrap the ribbons around where it meets in the back, cut a little seam and then press it together. And then I like to take a palette knife and just press that down just to make sure it is nice and even and there's no like uneven edges, if you will. So I did that for all three tiers. And now I want to put the dots on here. So I'm resting my elbow on that container and I'm supporting my hand, my piping hand with my other hand. And I'm just doing this like a 5 on a dice. So I'm doing one in the middle, one up top, one down, one in the middle, one up top, one down, all the way around the cake. So I am just getting eye level with this and making sure it looks even. You have to just try to make it look as even as possible. So I'm trying to line them up with each other to create this pattern. And then anytime you pipe anything, the points are going to be sticking out. You can see how the points are sticking out. It looks weird. So I'm dipping a paintbrush into some water and just pressing all those points back down. I did use a number 4 tip on that icing bag when I piped all of these dots. It takes a little bit of time to do this, but it looks so much neater. And look how pretty that looks. Let's put that back in the refrigerator. Now I want to put this sunflower together. So I am dipping one of those petals into that piping gel and then sticking that end into that thicker brown disc. So you want to make sure that these are spaced out enough because I'm going to do a couple different rows of here. I'm taking my dry paintbrush and just removing any excess piping gel that's at the base. And then that next row, I'm staggering in between the row behind it. So the petals aren't all lined up. And then I take the smaller petals and put them on the very top. So I did the two larger rows on the bottom and then another larger row on the top. And again, that video that I'm going to link in the description goes into full detail on how to do this. Now I have that orange dust and I'm just making sure I don't have too much on there. So I'm tapping it on a paper towel before I do this. And again, I'm trying to get the orange dust closer to the center of the flower and then making it more yellow as it gets to the edges. And I'm trying to get in between all those layers. You can dust each individual petal before you put it on there, but I just find it to be easier to do it this way. And look how pretty that looks when you dust it. So let's set that aside at room temperature to dry. Now I rolled out that white fondant. I have these leaf cutters and a leaf veiner, and I am pressing that down onto the veiner just to create a little leaf pattern in my fondant. And I did this for a bunch of different leaves. So I think I did 2 of the big ones and a few of the smaller ones. I didn't know how many leaves I was going to need. So I just made a bunch of different ones. And then I want to make these little curlies for the flower. So I'm rolling this out. You want to make sure that your fingers don't make marks into this fondant. So I'm cutting it on an angle so each end comes to a point and gently rolling that out so it's an even thickness. And then you can use a paintbrush or any kind of tool and just wrap this around there and place that on the cutting board. And that does have that Tylose powder mixed into it, so they're going to hold their shape. And now I want to cut more of these hexagon patterns out to make like a little beehive pattern on the cake. So I did that in a bunch of different colors. And let's set those aside as well. Now let's decorate the cake. I got that out of the refrigerator. This icing is cold and hard. I'm not going to mess it up. I printed that heart out the size I wanted it to be. And I'm tracing this on here with my Dresden tool. Now remember that cake is cold. The icing is hard. I'm not going to mess it up when I do this. So that way I know where to trace these little lines here. I have an icing bag with a tip number 2 with black buttercream icing. However, I switched out to tip number 1 because I found that tip number 2 was a little too thick. And once I piped all of these on here, then again, I took a wet paintbrush and pushed in the points. And then I'm getting a little toothpick behind all of these bees, get a little bit of icing behind it, and stick these bees down. So it looks like there's a little bee trail, right? So I want to make sure the tail of the bee is facing the trail, not the front of the bee, because that trail goes behind him. Now I want to anchor this into the cake by getting 2 long skewers behind it, and it's angling down, so it's going to kind of hang on there like a picture hook, so it's not going to fall off. So I'm pressing the skewers down into the cake, and then I want to get a little bit of black icing behind it because it's touching black fondant, so I'm using the same color icing. And that thing ain't going nowhere. I'm just using a dry paintbrush just to remove any excess icing behind there. And that is really secure. Now I'm getting some piping gel behind this leaf, and I'm going to stick that down. I figured it was a little too long, so I took some scissors and I cut the end off, and I'm just going to tuck that flat part behind the flower and just give it a little motion when I put it on there. So the piping gel is going to help it to stick. And I'm doing the same thing for the other leaf. I got some piping gel behind it, and I'm giving it a little curve and some motion when I stick it to the cake. And I'm getting a toothpick behind that daisy and sticking that, well, it's a sunflower, and sticking that down. And then I'm also getting some piping gel behind these little curlies where it's touching the cake. I'm using the end of my paintbrush just to press that onto the cake and getting some piping gel behind the pieces where it's going to stick. And now I'm getting toothpicks behind a lot of these decorations because she had a really long drive and I didn't want these to fall off. So you see how I'm putting the toothpick in and then anchoring the decorations down on there. Maybe I get a little bit of icing behind it as well. So every time I stick the bees down, I put the bee down first and then I create a little trail. And there's no rhyme or reason to the trail. I just do a dotted line kind of swirling back and forth. Maybe I do a little loop. Maybe I just go in little waves back and forth.
but it is pretty simple just to make those trails, and it looks so cute. Now I'm sticking all of these on here on this black tier, and I'm doing a little black border in between them, kind of like I did on the topper. And again, starting with the dark on the bottom and ending with the light on the top. And again, I want to anchor this onto the cake. So I'm putting 2 toothpicks in there so it's angled down into the cake. So it's going to hook on there. Press those toothpicks down so it doesn't poke through the front of the flower. Get a little bit of icing behind it and just press that down onto those toothpicks. And again, getting some leaves down and some of those white curlies down as well. And then I'm just finishing this off by putting down some bees and then creating the little trails. So I'm doing the bees on the top and the bottom tier with the trails. Now I want to clean the cake drum, so I just have a wet paper towel and I'm just wiping that clean. And now I want to put the topper on, so I'm centering that on the top of the cake. Now remember, that dried for a couple days, so it's holding its shape. It's really hard. And then I'm getting a little bit of icing behind the name where it's going to touch the topper and press that down. And then to make sure it doesn't fall, I'm getting a tiny toothpick underneath one of the letters. Do you see that? It's barely sticking out. You're not going to notice it, but that way the right side of the name won't slide down. And then again, I'm anchoring these on here, so I'm getting a little toothpick behind it, get some icing behind it as well, and then press that down against the topper. These toothpicks are going to help prevent all of these little decorations from just dropping and falling off of the cake and the topper. So it is necessary. I do let my customer know that there's tons of toothpicks on there. And here is the cake. How cute is that?
So there you go. How adorable is this cake? I just love this design, and I just want to go over a couple things with you. Number one, I don't think that I addressed this in the video, is whenever I'm making decorations for a cake, I take my ruler and I go over to the cake in the refrigerator and I measure the space where I want to put the decoration. So if the front of the cake is 4.5 inches tall and I need room for a border, then I can print something about 4 inches tall so it will fit on the front of the cake. And the same goes for the topper. So the top tier of this cake was 5 inches. So I had to make the topper no more than 5 inches across so it would fit. The second thing I want to review is, I didn't show it in the video, but she told me that she had to pick up this cake and drive about 2 hours with it. So what I did, the white part of the top and the bottom tier, I actually wrapped a piece of white fondant around it. So all 3 tiers were covered or wrapped with fondant. That way, as the cake softens, as they were driving with it and they go over bumps, there won't be any hairline cracks in the buttercream icing. And it was on a very hot day. So luckily they came a little bit early and they were able to get it home in one piece. Now, they did bring a big like Tupperware storage container and some dry ice, which helped to keep the cake cold. And I also removed the cake topper. I put the topper in a Ziploc bag and I put that in a box that had bubble wrap on it and I taped it shut. I did not want to keep the topper on the cake as they were driving with it, because as that icing starts to soften and they go over bumps, the topper could shake and it could either fall or just distort the top of the cake. And also, I know I put a lot of toothpicks and skewers behind all of these decorations. However, I knew they were going to be driving with it for a long time, and I didn't want anything to slide down or fall off of the cake. So those toothpicks are just a little extra security blanket, if you will, for the decorations. But if this were winter and it was cold outside, I probably wouldn't put all those toothpicks behind the decorations because the cake wouldn't get too hot and the decorations wouldn't slide. So I do decorate my cakes a little differently depending on the weather. Now this cake on the inside, the top tier is a 2-layer torted 5-inch. The middle tier is a 2-layer torted 7-inch, and the bottom tier is a 2-layer torted 9-inch, and it's on a 14-inch cake drum. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cakes, and I will link that below. It feeds about 50 to 60 people, and how much did I charge? This one was $775. And I know with the magic of editing, it seems like I decorated this cake in less than 20 minutes, but just making those bees was probably about 2 to 2.5 hours. That big sunflower takes about 2 hours to make, and getting all those little trail lines on the cake is very time consuming. So sometimes cakes look like they're super simple, but they take a long time to decorate. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have ebooks with all of the recipes that I use. I have my scratch pound cake recipes, my best doctored cake mix recipes, all of the buttercream filling icing recipes that I use, along with my favorite fonts and my favorite numbers, and they are all listed in the description. And I also have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. There are 3 tiers to this program. The base tier is called the Cake Pop tier, and in this tier you can support me monthly and you get free and discounted extras being those recipe books that I just mentioned. You get early access to my YouTube content and exclusive content that I make only for my Cake Academy members. And the top 2 tiers both have access to my exclusive Facebook group, and in that group I go live. We just did a Zoom meeting about cake design. I have done buttercream tutorials and fondant tutorials. We've talked about customer complaints and pricing. I post pictures of all of the cakes that I make along with how much I charged, and we are having so much fun in this group. I would love to have you aboard. All the information is in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's Cake Have Fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.